Under the pale glow of a distant sun, the alien girl sat quietly on the edge of a cracked stone wall, her long slender fingers tracing the faded patterns carved into its surface. She had been there for hours, her gaze fixed on the empty road that stretched far into the horizon. The cold wind tugged at the thin fabric wrapped around her shoulders, but she did not move. Her mind was far away, drifting back to the place she once called home, the place that no longer welcomed her, the place where her own family had turned their faces away. She remembered the moment clearly, the sound of the door closing, the words spoken in low cold tones, the feeling of the ground falling away beneath her feet. She had not argued, she had not begged, she had simply walked away because there was nothing left for her. There, the streets became her shelter, the shadows her companions, and the silence her only friend. Each day she wandered farther, her steps growing weaker, her hope thinning like smoke in the wind. She did not know why she kept walking. Perhaps it was instinct, or perhaps a faint spark within her refused to die one day. As the sun dipped low and painted the sky with colors she had never seen on her world, she reached the outskirts of a small human town. She had heard of humans before, their strange ways, their loud laughter, their unpredictable kindness, but she had never met one. Her people told stories of them, some filled with caution, others with wonder. She expected nothing, yet something in her heart told her to keep moving. The air here was different, filled with the scent of earth and cooking fires. She followed it, drawn by warmth she could not explain. Her legs trembled with exhaustion, and her vision blurred. But she kept going until she saw a dim light flickering through a dusty window. She stopped, unsure if she should step closer. Fear whispered in her mind, reminding her of rejection, reminding her of the way people's eyes could turn hard and cold. But another voice, softer and braver, urged her to take one more step, and then another. She approached slowly, her eyes scanning the place. It was small, worn, but there was life inside. A man sat at a table, his hands wrapped around a steaming cup. He looked tired but not unkind. The girl stood there in silence, unsure of what to do. The man glanced up, his eyes meeting hers. For a moment the world seemed to pause. She waited for him to frown or turn away, but he didn't. Instead, he stood and walked to the door, opening it just enough for the warm air to spill out. She felt it on her skin, and something inside her stirred. He said something she didn't understand, but his tone was gentle, and his eyes were steady. She hesitated, shifting her weight from one foot to the other, ready to run if he changed his mind, but he simply stepped aside, leaving the door open. The choice was hers. She took a step forward, then another. The warmth wrapped around her, the smell of food stronger now. Her heart pounded in her chest. She had no words to thank him, no way to explain the weight she carried, but she could feel that he understood in some way. She sat quietly in the corner as he placed a small bowl of soup in front of her. Her hands shook as she held it. The first sip brought tears to her eyes, not because it was hot, but because it was the first kindness she had felt in so long. In that moment she did not feel alien. She did not feel unwanted. She simply felt human. And that feeling, fragile as it was, gave her a reason to keep breathing. She did not know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in many days, she wanted to see it. That night the alien girl lay curled on a small couch in the corner of the dimly lit room. The blanket he had given her felt heavier than it looked, not because of its weight, but because of the comfort it carried. She had not felt such warmth in years. Her eyes stayed open for a long time, listening to the faint creaks of the wooden floor and the sound of the wind outside. The man had gone to another room, leaving her alone. Yet she did not feel abandoned. She wondered why he had let her in without questions, why his eyes had no trace of suspicion or disgust. Her own kind had turned away, yet this stranger had opened his door. She could not understand it. She tried to sleep, but memories kept slipping into her mind. Memories of cold nights under metal shelters, of the sharp taste of hunger, of walking for days with no destination. And now here she was, wrapped in something that smelled faintly of soap and firewood. She finally drifted into a deep sleep, the kind that comes only when a soul feels safe. In the morning she woke to the smell of bread baking. The light was softer here than on her own world. and she found herself staring at the way it painted the wooden walls in golden shades. The man was at the table again, but this time he was smiling faintly. He gestured for her to sit. She did. Hesitantly, he poured tea into a small cup and slid it towards her. The steam curled into the air, carrying a scent she could not name. She took a sip. It was both strange and soothing. He spoke again, slow and careful, as if he knew she did not understand his language. She shook her head gently, and he chuckled. The sound was low and kind. He reached for a piece of paper and a pencil, drawing a simple picture of a loaf of bread, then pointed to the real bread on the table. She realized he was trying to teach her the words. He said it slowly, letting her repeat it. Her accent was different, her tongue not used to human sounds. But he nodded with approval as the days passed. This became their quiet ritual. He would teach her words through drawings, and she would try to speak them, sometimes failing, sometimes making him laugh, though not in a cruel way. His laughter was warm, like a spark in a dark place. She began to help him in small ways, cleaning the table, sweeping the floor, folding cloth. He never asked her to, but she wanted to. She felt the need to give something back, even if it was small. In the evenings, he would sometimes play soft music. On an old device, she had never heard human music before. It was unlike the tones of her world. It carried emotion in ways she could not explain. Sometimes it made her eyes sting without knowing why. An afternoon, while she was hanging clothes outside to dry, she saw a group of children playing near the edge of the street. They stopped when they saw her, their eyes wide with curiosity. She froze, expecting the same look she had seen many times before, the one that came before whispers and cruel words. But one of them, a small boy, smiled and waved. She hesitated, then lifted her hand slightly in return. The boy ran closer, holding out a small wooden toy in the shape of a bird. He offered it to her without speaking. She took it gently, her fingers brushing against his, and for a moment something inside her shifted. She realized not all humans feared or judged. Some simply saw another soul. When she went back inside, she found the man watching her from the doorway. He did not ask what happened, but there was a look in his eyes that told her he understood. In that moment, she began to believe that maybe, just maybe, she could belong here, not as an alien, not as a stranger, but as someone who could share moments, learn words, and give smiles in return. The thought was both terrifying and beautiful, and for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to imagine a future where she was not alone. The next morning, the alien girl woke earlier than usual. The air was cool and smelled faintly of dew and fresh earth. She could hear faint clinking sounds from the kitchen. The man was already moving about. She sat up slowly, still clutching the small wooden bird the boy had given her. She had kept it close through the night. It felt strange to hold something given without demand, without conditions. She walked quietly towards the kitchen and found him preparing what looked like vegetables in a pot. He glanced up and gave her a nod, then pointed to a basket of fresh greens on the table. She understood and carried them to the sink, washing them carefully. He watched her for a moment, then gave a small smile, the kind that felt like approval. No words were needed. Their quiet cooperation had its own language. After breakfast, he gestured for her to follow him outside. She hesitated, then stepped into the sunlight. The air was fresh and full of distant bird calls. He led her down a narrow path that wound past small houses and into a wide open field. The grass swayed gently under the breeze. He pointed at the horizon, speaking slowly, his voice calm and steady. She caught only a few words, but the tone told her it was something about beauty, something about the way the land stretched endlessly. She felt a pull in her chest. Her own world had never looked like this. The colors here felt alive, almost breathing. They walked for a long time, sometimes in silence, sometimes with him pointing out things, flowers, trees, the tracks of some small animal in the dirt. She tried to repeat the words he told her, shaping them clumsily, but he was patient, correcting her gently. When they returned, she noticed a small woven basket sitting near the door. Inside were 2 loaves of bread and a folded note. She did not understand the words on the note, but the man read it and chuckled softly. He handed her one loaf and put the other inside. She wondered who had left it, but he didn't explain. Instead, he simply handed her a slice. Still warm from the oven it must have come from. She took a bite, and the taste filled her mouth with simple comfort. She thought again about how strange this human kindness was, how it came in such small but powerful ways later that day. While the man repaired a wooden chair in the corner, she sat by the window, carving small lines into a piece of soft wood. She had found it outside earlier, and it reminded her of the toy bird. Her hands moved slowly, remembering shapes from her own world, patterns her people used to mark family gatherings. She didn't realize the man was watching until he set down his tools and came closer. He leaned over, studying the patterns, and then pointed to them, asking something. She did not know how to explain in human words, so she touched her chest, and then drew a small circle on the wood. He seemed to understand, nodding slowly. His eyes softer now. She wondered if he could see that this was more than just a carving. It was a memory she was trying to keep alive at night, as the last light faded. She sat outside for a while, looking up at the sky. The stars here were scattered differently, yet she could still trace familiar lines, paths she had followed as a child. She felt the weight of her loneliness, but also something else, a growing thread that connected her to this place, to this man who gave without asking, to this little corner of a human world that had offered her a seat at its table. When she finally went inside, she found a small, folded blanket on the couch, softer than the one she had before. She looked at it for a long time, realizing that perhaps kindness was not just an act here, it was a way of living. And she wondered if she could learn it to asterisk the following morning. The alien girl woke to the sound of rain tapping against the windows. The air was cool and heavy with the scent of wet soil. She pulled the blanket tighter around herself and listened for a while. It was a different kind of silence, one filled with the rhythm of water and the occasional creak of the old wooden beams. She had never known rain to feel so alive. On her world it was harsh and metallic. Here it sounded like a gentle song. When she stepped into the kitchen, the man was already there, boiling water in a small pot. Steam curled upward and filled the room with warmth. He handed her a cup. The liquid was dark and unfamiliar, but when she sipped it, a deep heat spread through her chest. He said a word slowly. Pointing to the drink, she repeated it, her voice still uncertain. He smiled faintly, the kind of smile that made the morning brighter than the gray clouds outside. If rain didn't stop. Instead, it grew heavier, drumming on the roof until it almost drowned out every other sound. The man motioned for her to follow him to a small storage room. Inside were shelves filled with tools, jars, and bundles of cloth. He handed her an old coat and motioned towards the back door. She hesitated, but when she stepped outside, the rain soaked her instantly. She gasped at the chill, but he only laughed softly and pointed to the small garden at the side of the house. The soil was dark and rich, and the plants were heavy with water. He began picking a few vegetables, showing her how to pull them gently so the roots stayed intact. She tried it too, her fingers cold and wet, but the simple task filled her with a strange kind of satisfaction. By the time they returned inside, her coat was dripping, and her hair clung to her skin. He handed her a dry towel without a word, and for a moment she felt something she could not name. A quiet belonging. That afternoon, the man brought out an old book with pictures of different animals, pointing to each one and saying their names. She repeated them, sometimes earning a nod, sometimes a patient correction. When he turned the page to a bird with bright feathers, she touched the small wooden bird the boy had given her. Holding it in her palm, he noticed and looked at her with an expression she had not seen before, a mix of curiosity and understanding. He asked something, his tone soft, but she shook her head. The story behind the gift was hers alone for now. Still, the way he respected her silence made her chest feel lighter as the rain eased towards evening. The air filled with the smell of bread baking. Once again, she helped set the table without being asked, placing the cups and bowls neatly. He didn't say much, but she caught the way his eyes lingered for a moment, almost as if he was surprised she remembered where everything went. Over the meal, he spoke slowly, pointing to the food, making her repeat the words. She noticed that her voice no longer trembled when she tried. and when she got one right, he smiled in a way that made her feel she had done something important, even if it was just saying bread later that night. She sat by the window watching drops slide down the glass. The village outside was quiet, the streets glistening under the soft glow of lanterns. She thought of the places she had passed through before coming here, the cold looks, the closed doors, the nights spent curled against empty walls, and she realized this small wooden house had become more than shelter. It was the first place in a long time where she felt seen. The rain outside slowed to a whisper, and for the first time in many years, she closed her eyes and fell asleep without fear. The next day the sun returned, spilling warm light through the window and filling the room with a golden glow. The alien girl stood by the table, running her fingers along the wooden surface, tracing the faint scratches and marks left over the years. Each one felt like a silent story. The man came in carrying a small basket. Inside were apples, red and shining under the light. He set them down and rolled one towards her. She caught it clumsily, surprised by its smooth coolness. He bit into his and gestured for her to do the same. The taste was crisp and sweet, a burst of flavor unlike anything she had known. She smiled without meaning to, and when she looked up, he was smiling too. After breakfast, he handed her a small cloth bag and motioned for her to follow. They walked into the heart of the village, where the air was alive with chatter, the scent of fresh bread, and the clinking of metal from the blacksmith's shop. She kept close to him, her eyes darting over the strange human faces, some curious, some indifferent, some offering polite nods. At one stall he traded a bundle of herbs for a jar of honey. At another he picked up a loaf of bread and handed it to her to carry. She liked the weight of it in her arms, a quiet proof of trust. As they moved from stall to stall, she began to notice that people here looked at him with respect, and perhaps it was because of that. They didn't question her presence near the edge of the market. She saw the boy who had given her the wooden bird. He waved again, this time running over with two other children. One girl shyly offered her a small flower, pale yellow with a scent like sunlight. The alien girl took it gently, tucking it into the folds of her scarf. For a moment she forgot to be guarded. The man stood, watching, his eyes carrying that same quiet understanding she was beginning to recognize in him. It was as if he could see the fragile threads slowly weaving between her and this place. In the way back they passed a small stone bridge, where the water below glimmered in the sunlight. He stopped and pointed at a group of ducks paddling lazily along, saying a word she repeated carefully. He nodded and repeated it slower. She said it again, this time more clearly, and his smile widened. It felt like a small victory, one that warmed her more than the sun could. Back at the house she helped him unpack the bag, arranging the items neatly on the shelves. He didn't praise her out loud, but his small nod told her she had done well that evening. After the day's work was done, he lit a lantern and set it on the table. The glow softened the lines of his face, making him look even kinder. He brought out a small bundle wrapped in cloth and opened it to reveal a piece of paper and a short, worn pencil. Placing it in front of her, he began to draw simple objects, naming each one and letting her repeat. She did so, eagerly laughing. Once when her pronunciation turned one word into another entirely, he laughed too, but never in a way that made her feel small. By the time they stopped, she had learned 5 new words, each one sitting in her mind like a small treasure. Before she went to sleep, she placed the wooden bird, the yellow flower, and the small piece of paper with her shaky writing together in a corner of the couch. She didn't know why she kept them, but they felt like proof of something growing inside her, something she had almost forgotten. She could feel hope, fragile but alive, and for the first time she began to wonder not just how long she would stay here, but what it might mean if she never had to leave. The next morning the air was filled with the smell of warm bread and the faint sweetness of honey. The alien girl woke to find the man already outside, chopping wood near the side of the house. The steady rhythm of his work echoed through the still morning. She watched for a moment from the doorway, feeling an odd mix of caution and comfort. Eventually she stepped out, the grass still damp beneath her feet. Without a word he handed her a smaller piece of wood and a dull knife, showing her how to shave thin curls from the edges. At first her hands fumbled, but he stayed patient, correcting her grip until the shavings fell in light spirals. The scent of fresh wood filled the air, earthy and sharp, and for some reason it made her think of home after the wood was stacked. He motioned for her to follow him toward the back of the property, where a narrow path led into a patch of forest. The trees stood tall and close together, their leaves whispering softly in the wind. The light filtered through in scattered patterns that danced across the ground. As they walked, he pointed out different plants, touching each one lightly before saying its name. She repeated them, sometimes earning a soft hum of approval, sometimes a gentle correction. She was starting to notice the way human words felt on her tongue, the way some sounds carried warmth and others felt sharp, almost like shapes made of air deeper in the forest. They came upon a small clearing where a fallen log had been cut into neat sections. The man picked up one and set it upright, then showed her how to split it with a single strike of the axe. She watched closely, then tried it herself. Her first attempt was clumsy, the blade bouncing off, but he simply adjusted her stance and let her try again. This time the wood split cleanly. A sense of quiet pride swelled in her chest. He didn't cheer or clap, but his small approving nod was more than enough in the way back. They crossed a shallow stream, the water cool and clear. She stopped for a moment, kneeling to touch its surface, watching the ripples spread under her fingers. On her world, water rarely flowed so freely. Here it felt alive, carrying light along with it. When she stood, she caught the man watching her again, but not in a way that felt heavy. It was the kind of look that made her think he was trying to understand. Without intruding that evening, after they had eaten, he brought out the old music player again, this time with a tune that was soft and slow, the notes rising and falling like the breathing of the earth itself. She sat on the floor near the lantern, her hands resting on her knees, letting the sound wrap around her. When the song ended, she found herself humming a melody from her own world, quiet and almost hesitant. His eyes softened as he listened, and when she finished, he didn't ask for an explanation. He simply nodded, as if the tune itself was enough to speak for her before she went to sleep. She placed another small carving beside the wooden bird, and the yellow flower, this one shaped like a leaf from the forest. The collection was growing, each item a piece of her new life, each one a quiet promise that perhaps she was no longer drifting without direction. Perhaps she was slowly, cautiously, finding a place where she could stay. The next morning carried a different kind of stillness. The air was cool but bright, and somewhere in the distance a rooster called out. The alien girl stepped outside and found the man sitting on the small wooden steps with 2 cups of tea. He handed one to her without a word. The steam curled upward into the morning light, carrying the faint scent of herbs. They drank in silence, but it wasn't an empty silence. It was the kind that felt settled, like the earth after rain. After they finished, he motioned for her to follow him down the narrow dirt road, leading away from the village. The world felt wide here, the fields stretching far on either side, golden in the early light. They walked for some time until they reached a small building with stone walls and an open roof. Inside, a few villagers were gathered, speaking in low voices as they sorted bundles of grain and vegetables. The man greeted them, his voice calm, then turned to her and handed her a small bundle to carry. She hesitated, unsure if they would accept her help, but no one frowned or turned away. Instead, one older woman gave her a short nod, a silent welcome that settled deep in her chest. As the hours passed, she learned the rhythm of the work, tying the bundles, stacking them neatly, carrying them to the cart outside. Her hands grew sore, but she did not mind. Every time she glanced at the man, he was busy yet aware of her, and she realized he had brought her here not just to help but to be seen, to be part of something beyond the walls of the small house. During a short break, one of the younger villagers offered her a piece of warm bread. She accepted it shyly, and when she took the first bite, the taste was richer somehow, flavored by the simple fact that it had been shared by the time they returned home. The sun was dipping low, painting the fields with long shadows. She felt tired but light, like she had left some piece of her loneliness back in that stone building. As they stepped inside, the man placed a small cloth bundle on the table and opened it. Inside were a few coins and a folded note. He slid the coins toward her. She looked at them in surprise. shaking her head, but he simply pushed them closer. His expression firm but kind. She didn't fully understand why it mattered so much to him, but she tucked them away carefully. The small weight in her pocket felt like more than payment. It felt like trust at night, instead of sitting by the window. She joined him at the table as he sketched more objects for her to name. This time she was quicker, her tongue shaping the sounds with growing ease. At one point she said a word, so clearly that he paused, then smiled in a way that made her feel a strange flutter in her chest. They worked until the lantern burned low, and when she finally lay down, she realized something. Her days were no longer only about surviving. They were beginning to have meaning. Before she closed her eyes, she added a new item to her growing corner, a piece of twine. From the grain bundles she had tied earlier, it didn't look like much, but to her it was a sign of the moment she had stepped into the world again. No longer invisible, no longer entirely alone. The morning came with a soft golden light that spilled gently across the floor. The alien girl woke feeling a strange weight in her chest, not the heavy ache she had carried for so long, but something quieter, steadier. She rose and found the man outside tending to the small garden, his hands moving with the slow patience of someone who knew the value of care. When he noticed her, he motioned for her to join him. Together they knelt in the soil, planting new seeds in neat rows. His voice was calm as he spoke their names, and she repeated them, committing the words to memory like fragile treasures. The earth clung to her fingers, cool and damp, and for the first time in many years she felt not like a wanderer passing through, but like someone leaving roots behind. Later that day, they walked to the edge of the village where the road curved toward the hills. The air smelled of grass and distant rain. The man carried a small basket with bread, cheese, and the last of the honey. They sat beneath a tree whose branches reached wide like open arms, sharing the simple meal while watching the clouds drift slowly across the sky. At one point he handed her the small pencil and paper they had been using for lessons, encouraging her to try drawing something. She hesitated, then began sketching the wooden bird, the yellow flower, the leaf, the twine, each item from her growing collection. When she was done, she slid the paper toward him. His eyes lingered on it for a long moment before he looked at her, and though no words passed, she knew he understood. The story it told as the sun dipped lower, turning the world into a tapestry of gold and shadow. They began the walk back. She realized that the fear of losing this place no longer felt as sharp. Instead, there was a quiet certainty inside her, that even if life changed again, what she had found here, trust, kindness, belonging, would stay with her, carved into her like the patterns she once made in wood. When they reached the house, he paused at the doorway and placed a hand gently on her shoulder, just for a second, enough to say without speaking that she was no longer a guest. She was home. That night she arranged her small collection in a careful row on the table. The wooden bird, the yellow flower now pressed and dry, the leaf carving, the twine, and the paper with her drawings. She sat for a long while looking at them, each one a moment, a proof of survival and connection. She realized that when she had arrived, she had nothing but silence and shadows, and now she carried stories, warmth, and the weight of a kindness that had stitched her back together, piece by piece. Outside, the wind moved softly through the trees, and inside, she lay down beneath the blanket he had given her, no longer wondering if she belonged, but knowing she did, in a way that would never leave her. The world beyond might still be wide and uncertain, but here, in this small house with the man who had opened his door without question, she had found what she had once thought was lost forever, a place where her heart could rest.